Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Frontline. I'm Colonel David Giammona on the Battle Ready Network and now on Roku TV's Remnant channel with Pastor Todd Coconato. We want you to subscribe to Frontline on YouTube on the Battle Ready Network. Joining me today is a world-renowned commentator, author, speaker, host of a nationally syndicated radio show, and much more, Todd Starnes. Todd, great to have you on the show today, man.
Well, thanks, Colonel. Really appreciate it, and always great to hang out with you.
As I was talking earlier, I'm always on your show. I'm glad you could come on our show, and we're going to get right into it. You know, on your show, you talk much about the media and the corruption that's going on around America and really around the world. You know, Todd, I just want to start out with this. What got us in to all this corruption in the media? How long has it been going on? I remember days of Walter Cronkite, and you know, that's the way it was. It was just a 30-minute show and boom, that was it. But we have gone a long ways from there. What's going on?
Well, we have, and I hate to break the bad news to America, but the media has always been like that, even from the early days of the country when you had Benjamin Franklin, who was an editor of a newspaper. The whole point of those newspapers and those pamphlets, Thomas Paine, you might recall, they all had a point of view. They all had an opinion page. And sometimes that opinion page was on the front page, much like we see today with the New York Times. But I think in the really, it was the turn of the century, from the 19th century going into the 20th century, that we really saw journalism trying to become something other than what it was, which was really a blue-collar man's profession. Many of the newsrooms were populated by men. There were no female reporters. There was a lot of gambling and carousing and drinking, and it was not a place for a good Southern Baptist to be employed, I can tell you that much. But sometime in the 1920s and the 1930s, you had publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, which was then owned by the Graham family, and they were trying to actually do good journalism. And of course, out of that, you had the creation of radio with Edward R. Murrow, right, and the Murrow boys, and there really was a standard that they were trying to ascribe to. Now, but even back in those days, there was some liberalism that was creeping in to the profession. But Colonel, what's really interesting is that the demise of modern day journalism and the complete collapse of modern day journalism actually began with Walter Cronkite when he turned against the Vietnam War. That's really when it started.
Wow. You know, Walter Cronkite, for us who have been around for a few years, was just a model, we thought, of journalism, but I can see where that started happening. But Todd, it's gone down, way down from there. I mean, we've got people on the news today that are flat out lying about things and are not telling the truth, and they know they're not telling the truth. In fact, my co-host, Troy Anderson, was in the news business many years, and he said there were stories he would turn in, LA Times, other places, they would not accept because it was too conservative. What has happened? What's going on here? And is there a way out of this?
Well, I think there is a way out, but we've got a long ways to go. And the challenge really is in the journalism departments at our public and private universities. I've been very surprised to see, even in some of our Christian universities, conservative Christian universities, the journalism departments are actually controlled by people who are left thinking. So that's a big problem. But if we're going to change the culture in American newsrooms, we're really going to have to change the kinds of journalism majors that are coming out of our colleges. That's going to be a very long process. I remember I started my journalism career when I was just a kid. My dad was an electrician, and he told me I had to have a summer job, so I became his helper. I nearly electrocuted my dad, so he fired me and took me down to the local newspaper and got me a job. My very first job was sweeping the floors of our weekly newspaper. But I learned the craft, I learned the trade, and everything. You learn how to do everything. Well, a couple of years ago, when I was still working at Fox News Channel, I got a letter in the mail, and it was actually from the guy who was the editor of the newspaper at the time. And I had no idea what his political leanings were, but it turns out that he's a raging leftist. And he actually wrote this letter saying how ashamed he was that I worked at that little newspaper back in the day. And I'm thinking, he's ashamed that I swept the floors. But this is the mindset of these people, Colonel. That there is an evilness about it. So so the question is, how do we get out of it? Well, we've got to really get some good, solid journalism programs going out there and train up that next generation of journalists. But here's the problem.
Yeah.
We don't need, we understand what the left does, but the sad news is the conservatives, some of the conservative media, they're doing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at Fox News, Roger Ailes, who passed away several years ago and was a dear friend, and of course was my boss, he had this concept of fair and balanced news. Right. Present both sides of the story and let the viewer decide where they stand on the issue. That's what we need. We don't need conservatives telling us, okay, this is how you should believe, or the left saying this is how you should believe. We need the facts. Just give us the facts. I think we're all grown up enough to figure out where we stand on the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. In the military, we're a reflection of society at large. And so whatever you see in the military is really what's going on in the world around us. And I served under a lot of different presidents. And President Obama, for example, wanted to make it, a testing ground for a lot of things that were distasteful to the military because we're a very conservative organization. And I think that's what's going on in America right now. Isn't the media just a reflection of what's going on in the populace?
Oh, I think so. And again, now we're watching the balkanization of news. I mean, it used to be when I was growing up, you had 3 channels and then you had PBS. So you were either getting your news from ABC, CBS, or NBC. And then cable came along. Remember Ted Turner, right, and the big superstation coming out of Atlanta, TBS. And he launched CNN, which in the early days did an amazing job. I mean, think back to the first Gulf War, where you had that incredible coverage coming right out of Baghdad, where the CNN anchors were literally broadcasting the war from their hotel balcony. Those are some good days of journalism. So it can be done. But the question is, do they really want to do that? And is there money to be made in that? One of the things that we try to do on my website, it's not so much how we're covering the stories, it's the kinds of stories that we cover. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say that we'll take Jack Phillips, the baker from Colorado.
Right.
That would have been a huge story for us. That would have been on our radar because that's an attack on religious liberty. I don't think the mainstream media in the early days actually saw that story as being a legitimate news story worthy of coverage.
Interesting. So we have the military side of things, we have the journalism side of things, and I look at all of these things. In recent days in America, of course, we had Joe Biden talking about the State of the Union yesterday. I'm sure you're knee deep into that today and all the coverage going on. We have this balloon that's covering, United States, and we're shooting it down, and maybe even a prelude to war. And I remember, Todd, that in the early days, you're exactly right. CNN, every place you went in our battalion, in our division, in the military, they had CNN on. When we deployed to war, we had CNN on all the time, and it's come a long ways from that. But right now, the media can be a very dangerous weapon in the United States, either for good or for bad. Right now, we're in a very precarious place. We could be on the brink of World War III with China. We could have other really bad things going on in the world, and yet the media, I think it refuses to acknowledge that they're part of the problem. What say you?
Well, I think that they are a major part of the problem. Going back to the early days of the country, the reason they wanted to give freedom, they wanted to give that right to free speech, freedom of the press, is because they did not have that in the United Kingdom. There was a price to pay for speaking out. So you had, in the early days, it really was sort of a rough and tumble, wild west as people tried to figure out what that meant. But the whole point of that was to hold those in power accountable. And there was the media in the early days of the country did a very good job of that. But now when you look at what we call the fourth estate, now it's as if they have become the propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. And this actually goes back, and there's a fascinating story about JFK and Bill Bradley, who was the longtime executive editor of the Washington Post.
Right.
They were actually very dear friends. JFK and his wife, Jackie Kennedy, and Bradley and his wife, they would vacation together, have dinner together. And there was really no separation between the Washington Post on the editorial side and the White House at that time. And that really was sort of the beginning stages of the Democrat Party's close relationship with the media. And then there was a lot of distrust. I mean, look at what happened with Watergate. And so now you have generations of journalists that don't want to come out to tell a good story or serve their communities. They want to be the next Woodward or Bernstein, and they see a conspiracy theory behind every story they cover.
So you have encountered in your career a lot of ups and downs, both with conservative and liberal media stations. So where are you today? I mean, after going through all the things that you have gone through and the difficulties you encountered with both conservative and liberal, where are you? Where do you ending up today, and what does your future look like in the media?
Well, I served 15 years at Fox News, and every 3 years you had those contracts, and they either renew the contract or they don't. And after 15 years, they decided, you know what, we're good, we're done. So I moved back home to Memphis and started my own media company, and that was about 3 years ago now. And we run about 2 million readers a month on our website. The national radio show, now we're on 140 radio stations around the nation. And, we're doing really well. We're, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a bit of an adjustment, but it's good being your own boss. It's good being able to tell stories and not have to worry about censorship. And, I will say that out of the 13 of the 15 years I was at Fox, I was never told what to write. I was never censored. And that was a great thing. And I appreciate the great work of Roger Ailes and the company that he built there. And I believe that Fox News at the time was really a force for good in this country. So we really hope to do that on a much smaller scale, but you never know. I own a radio station, a news talk radio station in Memphis. And, we're just doing good old journalism and, getting that news out to the people.
No, I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate being on your show talking about military matters. And let's switch gears a little bit and talk about military matters. And of course, now the colonel's talking to the non-military person. But from your perspective, we have some very serious things going on in the world right now. And like I said, the media can be part of the problem. But these balloons that China is sending over, they seem to be testing us. There's other things that they're testing us through a lot of different channels. What are you seeing? What are you sensing? And I'll tell you what I sense, but I want to hear from you. What do you think the future is going to be here in the near future with China, Taiwan, North Korea, the Asia Pacific theater, and all the things happening there right now?
There are a lot of potential dumpster fires out there. And I think the concern is that you could have multiple dumpsters burning at the same time, whether that be Russia, Ukraine, what's happening with Iran right now. Will they make a play in the Middle East? You have North Korea that's now palling around with the Russians. What is that going to look like? And then, of course, you have China and Taiwan. And this balloon story, which is just bizarre. What really strikes me, Colonel, and maybe, again, you will have the insight here, but General Milley saying that ultimately they chose, that this happened during the Trump administration, but they didn't want to tell the president because they were afraid he might do something. Well, in fact, that's true. And by the way, I talked to the president about this, President Trump, just a few days ago, and I asked him about that, and he said, no, there were never any balloons that flew over America during his administration. But if General Milley is accurate in his description, keep in mind, this is the same general who told people inside the Pentagon to pledge their allegiance to him, that if Trump wanted the nuclear codes, they were not to honor those directions. And he also said he contacted his his counterpart in China to tell them that they would not be declaring nuclear war. This is insane, because it looks to me that this is treasonous behavior. And if nothing else, you are ignoring orders from your commander in chief. And it was shocking to see General Milley still sitting in the Congress in his military uniform after all those revelations.
Oh, absolutely. And if that was true, and we've talked about it on your show before, if that is so, then traitor is a key word here. He should be tried. As I tell people all the time, if I did half the things these leaders were doing right now, I'd be in jail. I'd be in Leavenworth making big rocks into little rocks. So absolutely. And so we have the war situation, and really, as I said several times, we could be, and I'm not warmongering, and I'm not trying to scare people, we could be on the brink of World War III with all those dumpster fires you talked about all around the world. If something were to really ignite, let's say Putin uses nuclear weapons in the Ukraine, or China invades Taiwan, or North Korea sends a nuclear message to us, we're going to be off to the races. And so it behooves us to really understand the times that we live in, correct?
Well, you're absolutely right, Colonel. And it reminds me of another time we came very close to the brink, and you might remember this 13 days during the JFK administration, where you had the blockade of Cuba. And you had those portable missile units that were set up there by the Russians. But there's a wonderful story. There's a backstory here that actually involves the media. And again, this shows how the media can be used for good. The New York Times was ready to go with the story, and they were getting ready to publish it. And it took a call from the president. JFK called the publisher of the New York Times and said, "I can't tell you why, but you need to hold this story." And the publisher agreed to do that, even though he knew it might mean missing out on the scoop of all time. But one of the reasons, and one of the ways they were able to diffuse the situation, it turned out that one of the Russian assets was actually a friend of an ABC News journalist.
Wow.
And that journalist who happened to live next door to this Russian asset, who was a compatriot of Khrushchev, sent back channel messages through the ABC News reporter, and the reporter was in the White House relaying this information to JFK, and the reporter had to promise that he would not disclose this information, and the ABC News reporter did, because at the end of the day, Colonel, and I think this is really where we're going with this, at the end of the day, everybody was a patriot. And they love their country. And I don't think we have a lot of people in the media right now that actually love their country and would put country first.
I was really amazed to hear. And I honestly, I'm no fan of Joe Biden. I think it's a lack of leadership, and I've said it many times before. But I do want to give him some kudos here yesterday when he said that, if China were to invade our sovereignty, continue to do that America would stand up. Now, I don't know what he means by that, but at least it gave me a sense, for one moment at least, that if push comes to shove, that Americans would come together and defend our homeland. What say you?
Well, yes and no. There's actually a survey out there, and they asked young Americans, if America was invaded, would you stay and fight or would you flee? And a shocking number of Democrats said they would get up and leave. They would not defend the homeland.
Wow.
But I want to agree with you, but there was something very troubling about this whole the China balloon story. And it had something to do with what the president said. He told reporters that he was wanting to shoot down this balloon on Wednesday, but he was told no, that his advisor said, no, you have to wait. My question is, who are those advisors?
Yeah.
Who are they to tell the commander in chief when he can and cannot blow that balloon out of the sky? It made no sense to me.
Yeah, I know the military was telling him if he shot the balloon out of the sky, it would endanger people on the ground. However, I have my doubts about this, because when they wanted to shoot the balloon, it was over Montana or Wyoming, yes, some open space. Who are they going to kill? Maybe some bison out there. So that didn't make any sense. Although there was a lot of hardware, something else is going on. I do believe one thing, Todd, is that we're being tested by the Chinese. There's no question about it.
I thought it was peculiar that, they say, well, this, and by the way, this balloon was about the size of a 20-story building,
Right.
and could carry a payload, they said, that weighed about 1,000 pounds, about the size of a jetliner. So you do wonder what was on there. And of course, they said there was some sort of a malfunction or whatever. But I just find it interesting, Colonel, because when you follow the air patterns, there's no way that balloon should have made that trajectory, which just happened to be over major military installations all the way to South Carolina.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
No, there's no coincidence. This was planned, and we can expect more of that kind of thing, maybe in different areas. Even someone had said, sent me an article the other day that said this could be a preemptive EMP strike, and so they're looking at coordinates of all of our nuclear weaponry. So, it remains to be seen what exactly the Chinese are up to, but it's not good. And so that leads me to we only have a few more minutes, unfortunately, so many things to talk about. But I want to get to the nitty gritty. I want to go deep dive here for a moment. America's in trouble, Todd, in so many ways. We've ousted God out of prayer, out of schools. We've ousted God out of the government. Not that he could be ousted, but that's just a terminology we use. We've lost our moorings in America, our religious moorings, our economic moorings, our governmental moorings, and it shows in the media. It shows in our public. It shows in our schools. And so, from your perspective, and you're connected to many sources throughout the day, throughout the week, what's the future of America going to be like?
Well, it's really questionable, and I'm a pretty hopeful person. I see people of faith stepping up and doing their jobs. I see school boards, and really, when you look at the fight, the fight is not in Washington. It really is on the home front. It's what's happening in your home first, and then what's happening in your public school and your local church. When you look back through American history and even the early days of the Revolution, our founding fathers were having a difficult time raising up an army to fight the British. So there's a great story of them going to South Carolina and asking pastors to preach about freedom from their pulpits. And those pastors actually helped raise up the army. You look at the civil rights movement. This was a nonviolent protest. Where was that protest birthed? It was birthed in the Baptist churches and the African American Episcopal Church, the AME churches.
Right.
So now we are living in a time when, unfortunately, a lot of our churches have been marginalized. They've been neutralized. I think one of the most dangerous things about the pandemic was the fact that so many churches were willing to shut down because the government told them to. But we've got to figure out a way to re-energize our churches, get pastors that are willing to speak truth to the culture. And most importantly, we need moms and dads who are engaged in the education process with their kids and are parenting their kids. And I think if we're able to do those kinds of things, then we're going to be able to see a change in this country.
Oh, we had Father James Altman on last week, who is a Catholic priest who the Pope does not like. And he said publicly that if you're a Democrat, you cannot be Catholic. And so we kind of quizzed him about that. He said, "Oh yeah," and he said much more. He also said that the road to hell would be lined with the bishops of the Catholic Church. Wow. So we have a firebrand priest, but I'm saying that to say this: that we need leaders like that to stand up. We're going to have Eric Metaxas on the show here on Friday, and he's going to be talking about his new book, The Letter to the American Church, which talks about parallels the Nazi Germany and the church not standing up to Adolf Hitler to today. We're not standing up to the culture, as you said, to the government. And so we cannot let the government shut the churches down or the doors of the church during pandemics, because we know another one's coming. It's being planned right now. I won't talk about that right now, but that's another show. But, with all that you just said, I think it's correct that we have to stand up in the media. We need leaders like you that will stand up and speak the truth no matter what people say. What say you?
Well, I appreciate that, and we need more people willing to do that, and that's what we try to do over on our website, toddstarnes.com. We tell those stories and we share that information, and I think that's really important, that people do that. And again, I don't think balkanization of media is a bad thing, provided you're getting information out there that's correct and factual. And nothing drives. Look, I get it. The left, they're always going to deceive. But what bothers me is when conservative media gets out there and shares a story they know is either untrue, maybe there's a half truth, and then the excuse is, well, we're just trying to advance the cause. Well, that's the exact same thing the left is doing, and that doesn't make it right. We need to be good journalists. That's what we need.
Tell people what balkanization means, Todd.
Well, it's like in Eastern Europe. So everybody's got their own little fiefdom, and so now. So, and again, it used to be in the 70s when I was growing up, you would have ABC, CBS, and NBC. So people were getting their news from one of three places, the majority of the nation. But now you're getting it from dozens of different places. And in some cases, somebody who watches Fox News will never read the New York Times. Somebody who reads the New York Times won't read Fox News. So everybody's getting a sort of a slanted view of what the facts are. Now, what I like to do is watch Fox News and read the New York Times, and then somewhere in between, you're going to kind of figure out what the real story is.
Yes, amen, brother.
So we actually have to be, as American citizens, we have to be good stewards of news, as consumers of news, and you got to do your homework.
Now, that's a good point for our listeners. Doing your homework, ladies and gentlemen, is really what this is all about, and not taking everything at face value. Todd, where can we find you? You mentioned a few websites. Tell us, and we'll have a ticker throughout the whole show telling us how to get a hold of you.
ToddStarnes.com, and you can get our newsletter, podcast, all free. So we don't charge anything for that. And of course, our national radio show, Monday through Friday, noon to 3 Eastern. And we of course, love having you on, Colonel. You always do a terrific job.
Well, thank you. And Todd, thank you so much for joining us today. We're running out of time, but we hope to have you back in. And I'll probably see you at the NRB here in May, as we did last year. So
it's going to be great.
God bless. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Colonel.